Hello, and welcome to Looking Out the Podcast, in which we connect the dots across mobility, design, and culture. My name is Drew Smith. I am a design strategist and coach living and working in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, and all of these opinions are my own.
And my name is Joe Simpson. I'm a design and product strategist working in Europe for one of the automotive OEMs, whose views I do not and have never represented on this show.
So with those disclaimers out of the way, we're going to talk about...
Can you guess?
Jaguar!
Jaguar.
And the Type 00, what we think it means, where it's come from, and where we think it might be all going.
We were both so interested in what's happened over the last 2 weeks and have talked about it at such great length on our text conversations and with many of the people we know around the industry. We thought we'd put together what will turn out to probably not be very short podcast about, as Drew says, what it all means, where it's all going, and what we think of it. So I've decided that two things. One, I'm going to play more of a devil's advocate role of positivity around it.
Okay.
Because...
You need a job.
Fuck off! No! Because I think it's more interesting if we do a kind of, I don't know, slightly differing views perspective on it and have a... And have a...
100%.
But don't you think, and don't you...
The
other thing is, that 2 days of lying on your back on opioids does funny things to your brain. My back is still quite fucked. I went to the osteopath today. It's a little bit better. I can sit down now, which is nice. But I really want to try to keep a focus on what it means rather than whether we like it or not.
Sure.
Because I think, inevitably, but I think that's what I struggle with a bit from a lot of the commentary. And this is where the whole fucking, but it's not for me, it's fine, I'm not Target, I haven't got the money to buy it, sort of like attitude thing comes from. And as I said to you yesterday, I think this then creates a sort of weird circle jerk of sort of excusing yourself from trying to understand things. And I suppose I come at it from the point of view that as a journalist you should try to do that, but I think journalists come at it from the point of view of I shouldn't always force my own opinion on people, so I'll try to step back from that. But I think for us as strategists and as people who sort of are involved in helping others shape the future, I think trying to help decode and sort of articulate what is trying to be done, whether or not it's being done well, is actually really interesting.
So I had this amazing realization before I came on, as I was kind of getting set up.
Yeah.
If I squint,
Yeah.
I am the target market.
I mean, a bit, yes.
Well, okay, so let me run you through this. Like, queer as fuck, right? I wear clothes that don't conform to my external gender presentation without irony, because I actually enjoy doing that, right? I've spent an awful lot of time in the clubs of Europe.
Yes.
And if I think about the kind of money that I earned in my previous roles, I could very easily finance one of these things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting realization for me. Like, shit, like...
I'm nearly Target.
And
you're in your 40s. Like,
and I'm in
you're
my
not-
40s, so I'm
you know.
20 years younger probably than what the average age of a previous
Car buyer
Jaguar
is.
or car
No, I mean,
buyer.
Jag will be older, but general car buyer, like late
Right.
50s, early 60s. you
Right.
know.
So, and I'm an urban dweller.
Yeah. And you live in a cool place, Sydney.
I mean, if you want to call it cool, fine. I like it. It's great. But all this to say that because I too have had a problem with the whole, "Meh, it's not for me." Like, and it's felt like the whole "it's not for me" thing, like if you're not a strategist, fine. Right? And if you're not a journalist, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are, as we are, like we're both strategists, I think we have a responsibility to do our job.
Yeah,
Is to think through what this thing is, what it represents, and who it's for, and to have a punt at working out whether it actually
achieves that, succeeds.
Fits the brief. Now,
Yeah.
the one qualification that I will put around like the I'm the target market thing, like obviously they're talking about, wanting to target this thing at ultra high net worth individuals. That is
not
not
telling
me.
everyone you're ultra high net worth. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, not ultra high net worth, but
Just high net worth.
good enough, right? Good enough for this to be an aspirational product,
Yeah.
to be something that should be making me go, yeah, like why not?
I mean,
and it doesn't. It very clearly doesn't. So that's kind of the personal thing for me out of the way.
okay.
I
think it's
dive
we can
in
come
for-
back to that.
Yeah.
I think it's still interesting to think about who it is for. Who is it going to appeal to, and why? Or who are they trying to talk to, and how much of this is sort of like signal and noise, and then what they're doing strategically in trying to sort of set up, I think, an arc that began in the end of November with the brand video, and actually only reaches the road and customers later in 2026, albeit we're going to see production cars next year. So how do you work that narrative arc and hold attention and interest? Because fucking hell, they've got attention. Like, they have got the world's attention. But how do you work that and sustain it in what is a attention economy? And by that we mean short attention span economy. I think that's really interesting, because I think to me, it's one of the many, many tensions that exist here. Like this short attention span economy, things that are kind of like fashion and sort of flights of kind of sort of trends, against a car which is an inherently a much longer lasting or much sort of like longer term proposition. But then that takes me back to the kind of people who it's aimed for, who we know cycle through cars much more quickly than most of the people listening to this, or you and I.
And I think there's a really interesting thing to pull apart there, which is if you're wanting to build brand loyalty, is that the kind of customer you want to be aiming for? If we know that they cycle through cars, if we know that they cycle through brands based on whatever is hot at the moment.
Trendy. Yeah.
Yeah, like how do you build a sustainable core customer base with that cohort? And there's something really interesting there if you think about, because we're talking about luxury brands here, right? Jaguar wants to position itself no longer as a premium brand, but as a true luxury brand. And it's an assumption, but it's one that I think is fairly well informed. That if you look at the true luxury brands of this world. And I mean, let's take Hermes as the exemplar. Hermes will have a core base, right, that spends over the course of decades buying the stuff for which the brand is most well known, the stuff that feels deeply rooted in the history, I would say, of the brand. And then there are going to be the kind of the seasonal buyers, the people who kind of dip in and dip out, depending on whatever sort of limited edition is coming with this drop, with this season, whatever. But it's that core contingent that is always there, that is always sustaining the brand and has probably done so intergenerationally, given their wealth and given probably a family affiliation with that brand as well. And this is the other interesting thing about Jaguar kind of deleting its history, is that 90 years of equity or 100 years of equity, whatever it is, that ability for people to place themselves in the long arc of a brand's story, to root themselves in something bigger than themselves, has now disappeared because Jaguar has become ahistorical. Although they kind of went back on that at the launch in Miami by referencing the E-Type.
Yeah. I'm not...
Help me out, Joe.
Well, I don't entirely agree. And I think I'm going to sort of come at it from a slightly different angle. And there are a few things here, and we could spend the entire episode just unpacking those. So, has it deleted history or not? Is Jaguar's history essentially the E-Type and that's it? Because there's some quite good sort of takedowns and explainers online which talk about how, E-Type and XJS accepted... Okay, XJ... What is Jaguar? What is the history? I think you're absolutely right that most premium and luxury brands sit in this kind of historical story arc. We were talking about Renault referencing retro 2 weeks ago, or referencing their history 2 weeks ago, and that being one of the only ways to differentiate against like the kind of influx of new brands and Chinese brands. But what I think is, I'll just skip over all that. What I think is interesting is it feels like the customer base that they had was not going to sustain the brand.
Sure.
It was dying.
Fine.
Literally and metaphorically. They have somehow managed, well, for many reasons, managed to miss a generation that's sort of coming up. People that are probably a bit older than us that are attached to, certainly in the West, brands like BMW and Mercedes, I don't think would have considered a Jag. They weren't flowing into the brand.
Right.
And so they don't really have, to come back to your Hermes analogy, I think probably what they've considered is they didn't really have that core base of customers to sustain them. So instead what this is trying to do is do an enormous pivot to the other side and pick up much younger, higher net worth individuals, as you say, who are into the latest trends and flit brands. However, they are influential, and if you capture those people by having something that is fundamentally very arresting visually and very striking, and makes a strong statement, those people will start a kind of new arc for your brand, which is then, yes, very difficult to sustain with something like a car because it's inherently more fashionable. But I would say two things. One is that you then pull in a bunch of people who are more of a sort of tourist follower along, who will be like, oh, that's, these people are fundamentally influential people in the public eye, people who are celebrities, people who are in sort of industries like music and fashion. They will have influence. They then pull along a bunch of people who fundamentally are less influential but are heavily influenced by, sort of big public names and by what's happening in social media. And then secondarily, and I think the concept, I believe, hints at sort of towards this, and maybe we'll come back to this in a minute. Maybe they have a plan to sustain and update, and through things like CMF and personalization, continue to kind of keep it bubbling along. So when you think about what Rolls-Royce did when they introduced the Black Badge sub-brand, it wasn't at all to my taste, and I didn't think it was Rolls-Royce, but it lowered their customer age by 10 years. It brought in new people to the brand by their own sort of admission, and it raised the average price point and the level of personalisation that was going on in the cars by like tens of thousands of euros. So as far as they're concerned, it's a kind of win-win-win. And I think Jaguar might be sort of trying to take from that playbook.
Sure. What does Jaguar now stand for?
This, I think, is one of the key questions that's still not fully answered from what we saw in the brand.
Have a go.
The brand video and the cars. Well,
have a go.
Apparently, I mean, in terms of words,
no, what does it mean? What does it mean to
modernism,
you now?
Modernism, exuberance, and what was the other one? I can't remember. But I think what it's trying to stand for is something that is not in the kind of automotive realm. It's trying to position itself as a fashion luxury good that's not encumbered and hindered by history. So to me, what Jaguar is trying to stand for is similar to the kind of startup brands, but with a historical name. So it's trying to do something kind of new and that's outside of the kind of like the traditional kind of car sphere, with the Jaguar name. And I don't think we have all the answers yet. I don't fully see it. I feel like they've said more about what they're not and what they don't want to do than what they are. And if I'm very honest, I'm not even sure they followed through on what they're not going to do. I mean, there's plenty of references in the car to things that are like past. And this is where maybe it let's see, it can go one of a couple of ways. It could really kind of like unravel, or it could be this sort of, this could be back to my kind of narrative arc, a drip feed of information which grows into something which makes sense as we get towards the production cars. I think we'll really have to see what they are.
This whole wait and see thing just feels like a massive fucking cop out, actually, and I'm seeing a lot of people doing the wait and see thing. I think it's actually really dangerous when you are trying to affect a change as radical as what Jaguar is trying to do. I think it's really dangerous to leave people asking questions like this, to leave a vacuum of substance and solidity on which to build.
So you're saying that to not be clear about what Jaguar stands for and represents, what is it most, we had this conversation again the other week, Mercedes builds the best luxury cars in the world, et cetera. What is Jaguar? What is it most at? What does it stand for? What are the kind of ethics and fundamentals of the company? And
what is its substantive opinion on the role that it wants to play in the consumer's life. And how does that then get expressed in a physical manifestation? Because as much as I have been party to car companies saying for a very long time that we're not a car company, we're a technology company. Like if you're saying that Jaguar wants to be a fashion brand, it's like same but different. Okay, cool. But at the end of the day, you're still trying to sell a car. That opinion then manifests in a physical product that people can then start to build a set of associations with. Seems to me fairly fundamentally important at the beginning of this narrative arc. Like the foundation is being set now.
Do you not think that that's more of a reflection on where we are culturally right now, where making a bang and having your moment in the sun and really being at the top of news bulletins, only ever lasts, and I suppose it's always been true, but only ever lasts for a few seconds, and to kind of basically make a statement to kind of be sort of seen is now the priority, not rather than building on what you stand for and what you mean.
So if you're going to do that, get it right. And I don't think Jaguar got this right.
This is great. So what don't you think they got right?
So the Overton window, i.e. what is acceptable kind of public discourse around what is termed pejoratively woke politics, has shifted dramatically in the past couple of years, right? The fact that wokeism and the woke mind virus is now used as a pejorative term to attack people like me, to attack people like Santino Pietrosanti, right?
Yeah.
Signals very clearly that the relatively brief, I would say, window of acceptability that we enjoyed has shifted. And there are examples of that happening well in advance of the launch of Jaguar's video on the 19th of November. Bud Light was one of many canaries in the coal mine that a strategy team could have looked at and gone, shit, probably need to rethink the foundations that we're going to lay for this brand. Now, I think the idea that they want to chuck out their old customer base, or at least treat them with, I think, what amounts to a certain degree of disdain, is a dangerous thing to do. It's a very, very dangerous thing to do.
And I'm not sure you're finished, but I would say I absolutely agree with you, because I don't think you should ever treat any customers with disdain. And most car companies, I think, just want to, in a very basic way, sell cars.
Sell more cars.
And they don't really mind who buys them.
You don't want to treat anybody, whether they're customers or not. Actually, you don't want to treat anybody with disdain, because actually, if you're thinking about selling, you want to think about everybody as a potential customer, right?
Yes, right. And yet, I feel that what we talked about whether this ends up in the cut on the podcast, I don't know. But we talked about, I came in and said to you, I want to talk not about what our opinion is on this, but the meaning behind it.
Sure.
And I think the meaning behind it is that Jaguar, on what it stood for, and its, to a degree, its customer base was so was almost like it, to your point, is kind of an identity politics thing, and it was aligned with a very old-fashioned, very and in places problematic image of the types of people who I think are absolutely the opposite of people who they now want to speak to.
Sure.
And they would never have been able to appeal to the types of people who they fundamentally need to sell cars to if they'd have tried to kind of entertain the old guys. So I guess my question to you is, okay, so if you're in their position, what would you have done? How do you walk the tightrope? Yeah, the tight... Christ. Can't say it. Thank you. Tightrope between... Let's over horribly stereotype here. The gin drinking gammon and the woke young high net worth influencers.
Language is a really interesting thing to me.
And we're going to cut that bit out because it didn't make Joe look that smart.
Language is a really interesting thing to me. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. And there will be people, I'm sure, particularly within Jaguar, if they're listening. Hi. We love you. We really do. We care enormously. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this chat. I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, what would I have done? And the thing that keeps coming back to me is that grace, space, and pace left so much room for just an incredible set of interpretations as a core set of values. That I feel would have given the brand the room to grow, to shift, but also probably wouldn't have landed it in anywhere, because grace is key here, right? Mm-hmm. This word grace, there's grace in behavior, there's grace in form, there's grace in how you show up.
Yeah.
And if I think about luxury, true luxury, there is an element of grace to a lot of it. And so I can understand why you'd want to totally reinvent the physical manifestation of the product. But surely there could have been something that keeps you rooted in what had made the brand great. And it's not the gin and gammon set, the gin and jag set. Although again, there is something kind of louche and fast living about the gin and jag set that again could have been transposed, I think, in perhaps a rather delightful way. You know, there was that amazing thing that Owen Reedy said to us when I sent him a photo of a Mercedes R107, and I kind of put Jags kind of in a bit of a similar place to R107 Mercs. You know, it's like driven by a blonde, you know, two gins to the wind who drives off in a fog of Chanel No. 5 and Marlboro Light. You know, like it's sort of very evocative.
I was just going to say, it's a very evocative, quite appealing sort of image.
you know, and I think what's happened here is that the brand has almost taken itself too seriously. One of the truly delightful things about Jaguar was that it was more relaxed. Like, it was a bit sort of devil may care. And that gave it a very different presence in the market from, you know, the staunchly Teutonic offerings of say BMW and Mercedes historically. And I'm reminded of the time when Volvo, right, tried to be naughty, right? The Steve Matten S60, and the campaign around that was like, I forget what it was, but it basically, there were Volvo ads with the word naughty in them.
I've just died off camera. I remember that.
Right? Like, it's really hard to erase
history,
to erase cultural association. So how do you find a way to work with it and to reinvent it and reimagine it? Because there's so much cultural goodwill. There may not be a whole bunch of custom, but there is goodwill. And that goodwill can go an awfully long way to helping you reinvent and reposition a brand.
And I think this is what is really fascinating about this whole thing. The brand was just backed into a corner. It wasn't going to survive with that tremendous amount of goodwill and care for the brand that clearly exists out there based on the outpouring that there has been. So what do you think?
So here's just to be clear, I'm not saying that the brand should have stayed the same.
No, I know you're not.
Right? What I am saying is that you could have worked with rather than against the cultural capital that you had.
While I agree, I'm still not sure that it would have had the impact that it's had.
What is that impact? Like, what is that impact though, Joe? Like, tell me how you categorize that impact.
Well, I can never remember a time when people both who are friends and contacts from within the car industry, but much more so people who are not, have messaged you saying, wow, what do you think? I can't remember the last time there was a car brand being talked about on Radio 4 Today. And I need to be I think there is something to explore here about the nationality, not in the way that you might expect us to talk about it, but in terms of, although I don't live in the UK anymore, a lot of the connections I have are UK based. A lot of my news feeds are UK news. A lot of my connections on social media come from the UK. And I think Jaguar is a British brand that is fundamentally known and loved in the UK for various reasons. And the perspective from within the UK is probably quite different to how it is in, say, Germany or the USA or China. Nonetheless, I think they will feel very happy, I imagine, to have got that coverage and to have raised awareness of their brand and have people talk about them again and remember them. Like, I think many people, for all the fondness that you describe, I think there were probably many people that had forgotten that it existed at all. I come back to my point, and I'm obviously in a position here where I'm thinking, I'm interpreting meaning. How can you sustain that when you're 2 years out from delivering products to customers will that work? Has the divisive and negative side of it, will that ultimately do you more damage? I'm not sure either of us believe in the sort of adage of, like, you know, the sort of there's only one thing sort of worse than, you know, being talked about in a negative way, and that's not being talked about at all. And that sort of feels like it was a little bit the sort of way that Jaguar sort of set this out. But I think there's a thing about the trying to relate to the kind of like rebellious, raffish, sometimes like punk culture that has come from the UK, which I think they are, or maybe are trying to play with. And I think that they are sort of, what to me is really interesting is this kind of projection into the future about what their brand can represent, what the cars can do. When you look at a future that is kind of completely electric, the whole rationale for premium brands, which is built on superior engineering, mostly in the department of the powertrain, is largely gone away. And so what you're left with is the experience that you create as the customer, the design, like, which, let's be frank, leads in terms of aesthetics, and then the meaning that design transposes and communicates of the person that is seen in the product or associated with it, and then to what we've been talking about, what the brand means. And I think if you're in a position where you've got brands like Rolls-Royce and Bentley, who people saying they're trying to compete with, but those brands are above this price point.
Right.
And if your quiet luxury space is very much owned by the likes of still some Mercedes and perhaps Volvo and, you know, sort of like brands like that. And if you, in a stable where you've already got Land Rover and the Range Rover brand doing what it does with kind of SUVs, where do you go?
Where do you fit?
Where, like, what?
Yeah.
And I think in fairness to them, that this was the sort of a bit the one place they could go. Do I think it's spot on? No. Is it to my taste? No. But is it interesting what they're trying to play with? And can I see some of the kind of, for me, does some of the sort of intention and the meaning come across? Yes. Okay. You know. But how do you feel? I mean, you told us how you feel, but I think I'm trying to get more into the product side is kind of interesting, and try to sort of lift up the meaning of what the actual concept tells us.
I mean, I think the context from which a product comes forth is a really interesting thing to explore in terms of what it might say about what that product contains in terms of an animating spirit, if you like. So two stories here. One was reported in the press many, many, many years ago. When Jerry McGovern...
I was just about... Are these stories going to centre on a certain G. McGovern by any chance?
Professor Jerry McGovern, OBE, Chief Creative Officer. I think that's the title.
Yeah.
So when he was at Lincoln, he reportedly walked into a room of Lincoln dealers to present a concept or a series of concepts, or to make some kind of presentation, and basically said to them, look, all of your customers are going to die. So we need to do something different. I don't think Jerry lasted very long at Lincoln after that, if memory serves.
He might have been right, though.
He might. he might have been right. He might have been right? Like I want to give the guy the benefit of the doubt, right? And I also want to give credit where it's due to the stuff that he oversaw while he was at Lincoln, because I think we all still look back at that and go, fuck, if you want to reinterpret a brand, holy shit. Like,
and
it was remarkable, right?
And if you're listening, sorry, quick interjection, do go and have a look if you don't know them. The Lincoln concept, and actually for the sake of comparison, the Cadillac concept of, around that time. Sort of look at like a kind of period of like 1999 to 2003. There was the
Lincoln Continental concept.
There's the Lincoln Mark 9.
The Mark
and
9.
Then the Cadillac 16. Go and have a look at those and look at them in side profile and compare them to the Jag. Anyway, carry on.
Anyway, so that's story number 1. Story number 2, you're actually involved in this one, Joe. We were at the Paris Motor Show, I believe it was.
2010?
Maybe. It was the launch of the Evoque. Evoque? Never been sure on that one.
It was a cracker of a show, that show.
It was a really good show. Some lovely Citroens. Anyway, Joe and I at the time were writing for...
Very good reporting on Car Design News, if you can still find it.
Exactly. We're writing...
Designers Night was interesting, wasn't it, Drew?
Was that the night that I got a motorcycle?
Yes, it was, but not after. I think you left early because there were many people who wanted to sort of speak to you. And in fairness to him, I think it was the same show that Eric Gillian fielded a call from Audi where he was like, no, they're not trying to take you down. No, I stand by the piece he's written. No, it's like, fair play to Eric. He properly stood by us.
Yeah, no, that was the night that I escaped on the back of a Honda Goldwing.
Anyway,
so we were on the show floor. Jerry was at Land Rover by this point, and to be clear, the Evoque, the LRX concept was designed by Julian Thompson. It wasn't a Jerry McGovern piece.
Correct.
All that being said, either you or I, doesn't really matter, asked Jerry whether he thought...
He was concerned?
That... Not the Evoque per se, but kind of the association with Victoria Beckham as kind of as like creative director for the Evoque project. What that would do in terms of the product's resonance with kind of the core Range Rover buying fraternity. And he turned to us and said, "Do I look like I give a fuck?"
A fuck. I was holding a tape recorder. I remember.
So this was on record. Jerry, if you're listening, it was on record. And
I think we might have edited it.
The interview basically ended at that point, right? Because here was a response that was so aggressive towards what felt like a legitimate inquiry into, vision for a brand. And
yeah.
So look, I mention all of this to say that there's form when it comes to taking a very aggressive attitude to a brand's history, standing in the marketplace, people's perception of that brand.
Yeah.
And I think it's also fair to say, based on my experience, my personal experience, that there is a culture that exists within JLR that really doesn't take well to criticism or questioning of authority. And I've done an awful lot of work in the organisational culture space over the years. And I've seen what certain types of aggressive leadership do to teams and how that then manifests in kind of the product that comes out of those teams.
Cars, I think I said in the last episode, I believe are a result of the culture that creates them. Unhappy cars are often a result of an unhappy culture. Confused cars are often the result of a lack of clarity of leadership culture. And I think some of the best cars tend to come from cultures where people are aligned, pulling in the same direction. There's healthy discourse, healthy disagreement, but, people feel safe and can experiment, because obviously within design, you need to be able to feel safe and not threatened in order to push boundaries, innovate. You need to be able to feel you can fail. We both know some of the backstory here, and I don't think it's particularly pretty. At this point, I would recommend you to go and read Adrian Clarke's 2 pieces on the Autopian. The one where he basically takes down the design of the car, and the other, perhaps even more interesting one, which talks about the brand and how Jaguar got itself here, and then some of the culture. And I think it's on record that, or it's quite well known, that Jerry, when he was in charge of Land Rover, really didn't get on with Ian and Julian on the Jaguar side. And that when this sort of reimagine project was kicked off, and when they started work on the car, it was teams. They had teams set up and they competed against each other. And Jerry's sort of direction was make it more Range Rover. And it's actually the Land Rover team that won the competition and is sort of responsible for this car. Now, that's just to give you some background. I really don't want this to come across like I'm trying to defend bad behaviour, because I think people who know me well or have known me around the industry know that me and Jerry have not lost any love over the years, and we've had run-ins and things too. And I know people who've worked there, and it doesn't sound like it was a particularly happy place to work. What I will say, though, is that Jerry's track record and ability to seemingly put his finger on the pulse of culture and what will resonate, not what customers want, but what will resonate, is, with the wild exception of the Discovery 5, second to none. And he has led many extremely successful products, which are very good pieces of design, which have done extremely well commercially. And that's kind of what Jaguar needs. And he absolutely doesn't give 2 fucks about what anybody thinks about him. And to some degree, I see this as a bit of a middle finger to the establishment and everyone else and everybody that's crossed Jerry. And yet he's managed to do it in a way where I think it can resonate with some of the people that they need to resonate with. And maybe it pains me a bit to say that, but I kind of want to just put it out there that I think that's maybe true. Doesn't excuse his behaviour or mean that I don't feel sorry for some of the people who've worked at JLR, or doesn't mean I want to work there, but I think it's, it's interesting to reflect on this cultural aspect.
I think the other thing that I would add is that ultimately that kind of behaviour never ends well. Either for, I mean, obviously for the people, but also for the perpetrator.
No,
and I think what's really interesting for me, like I think this point around having a finger on the pulse to kind of bring it back to the product and to the kind of the Overton window. I think things like Cybertruck, things like Okay, so Cybertruck kind of shifted the Overton window for what's acceptable as automotive design. I mean, we would violently disagree with that, with the fact that it is acceptable automotive design, but that's just an opinion. Like the Overton window has shifted for a number of people around what is acceptable. Elon Musk and the people like him have shifted the Overton window for what is an acceptable manifestation of masculinity.
Right. I was just going to say, what's acceptable behavior?
And what is acceptable behavior. And I think you and I both can probably name a few examples of automotive industry people who have looked at Musk and decided, that's a person I want to model myself on. And you see that behavior change. You see that start to manifest in the teams. And then ultimately you start to see that manifest in the product as well.
And yet I can't help but wonder whether, and this is in the realm of speculation right now, but for all of what we've been discussing, the thing I'm most curious about is not necessarily the design or the product per se, or where they're trying to reposition the brand. It is the context of the world in a couple of years' time, because right now, given the geopolitical context, I really wonder how that internal team feel about what they've done and how it's actually going to work out there in the market. Because I don't for a minute believe that this is a particularly European-centric sell. And in the Chinese market, we have seen just in the last year, with luxury and premium European brands, almost all of the problems that they face right now are created by the fact that in China, their sales are down 10, 20,
I think
40.
Porsche's down like 22%. Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, maybe it's not. One of the brands is down 40%. Maybe it's Volkswagen. Right. But on top of that, if you look at the mix of products that is selling, for the Chinese customers that want European luxury and are still buying into that, it's actually still associated with that historic prestige of the internal combustion engine.
Yeah.
If it's electric, forget it.
If it's electric,
Chinese,
I can actually get a better product from a domestic manufacturer.
A better domestic manufacturer.
And actually, go on.
No, and I was going to say, and then if we look the other way, and I think there's a very big USA play here, but we are seeing the most enormous of wobbles in the US market, where already EV sales were not down. Let's be realistic. They were growing more slowly. The graph line was flattening, but then that graph line could be squashed by potentially, or none of us know yet, a Trump administration that comes in and slaps tariffs on any import, not just ones from China, and takes away incentives, and I'm like, ooh, okay.
And can I? So.
Yeah, sorry, jump in.
Let's be honest. The car looks like Fab One fucked a Cybertruck. Okay, like it is outrageous and blunt and angry and like it to me.
It's polarizing. Some people will say wow, some people will hate it.
Sure, but I think what it appeals to is a reptilian. There's a reptilian appeal to it. Right. It's offensive, and let me be clear here. Like, offensive can be like a positive.
Positive.
It can be a positive, right? In terms of like generating regard from a buying public. And what's super interesting to me is that the type of product that sits within that same space in the United States, well, you know, Cybertruck is the exemplar, right? But you know, it's also kind of the Silverados and the Escalades, and these are products that appeal to, in many ways, an anti-woke. I'm putting that in inverted commas because it is a pejorative and I have a great deal of difficulty with that term, but it's the term that's being bandied around. It appeals to those products appeal to a rabidly anti-woke clientele, customer base, right? In large part. So the idea to marry this product aesthetic with a campaign that's built around diversity and color and let's smash norms seems to be in direct contrast to, like, those two things seem to sit in opposition to one another. Like, if I was going to appeal to that market, like, I would have just, like, gone down, like, Gotham Dark, isolate me from the world.
But I think this is really interesting because this comes back to the meaning perspective. And I think they will do that as well. You know, it's not all going to be, I can't remember what they called it, the Miami Pink. And the kind of bright blues and
London blue, Paris gold.
Paris gold. And it's been interesting to see on the web, like, you know, people doing renders of it murdered out and in, you know, grey and black. And there's a slight Versace, you know, make yellow shirts so that people buy more black shirts kind of quality. I think going on. So I'm not quite so. I don't think I'm quite so in the same space as you on that being a problem.
I'm not. I don't think it's necessarily a problem. But I just think there's a really interesting tension there between the physical manifestation of the product and
what the brand
what it kind of evokes, right? In terms of form language, right? It's brutal.
It's brutal. It's a middle finger. It's to me suggestive of something that's both offensive and defensive. It's a world where we want to, you know, it is a bit the Cybertruck playbook where it's like, yes, but I'll kind of like protect myself in my, you know, sort of nuclear war-proof thing, and if I get into an accident, I'll be sort of stronger than you.
It's not a product born of like love and connection. Like, let's put it that way, right?
It's like the opposite of Rivian. But I think that's a really interesting point. But just to go back to the one I was previously making, I think what I have a concern for them around is when you look at, and this is right now, and they're talking about a product that launches in 2026 and lives into the 2030s. So I'm just a bit concerned that the market for electric £120,000, euro, even dollar vehicles. Well, in China, it's not there if you're not a Chinese brand right now. And we predicted a bloodbath when we did the China show a year ago of the Chinese brands. Well, actually, since we've last bloody recorded a show, there's a bloodbath happening, and it's not the Chinese brands, it's the European and Japanese brands and American brands. It's like, so Volkswagen's gone on strike, Nissan's got 12 months to save itself, Tavares is out, martial law in Korea last night. What's going to happen tomorrow? So I'm a little bit like, oh, well, that's so you've not got potentially that many sales over there, and then in the US you've got all this kind of stuff with Trump and just the sales. I think you made the point. Oh, that was the other thing. Cybertruck, line workers don't bother coming in, and they've just got stock piled up. All the people who wanted one have basically got one now. And even though the production ramp hasn't really gone up to whatever it was they were projecting a year,
they're already stopping the lines.
Now can't sell them.
Right.
So I'm a bit like, okay. So when my biggest sort of thing is when I look at it, I'm like, how many have they got to sell? It's on a bespoke platform, and even at 120 grand, I'm like, I'm not quite sure how the unit economics stack up.
Because at 120 grand, they'd have to sell what? 30, 40? Maybe, I don't know. How many thousand?
It depends. It depends how much profit they want to make. It depends a lot on how deep are Tata's pockets. How long do they want to put behind it? But I think that the point I'm trying to make is on a bespoke platform at those kind of prices, and with the kind of volume, let's be generous and say it's like 50,000 units across a couple of products, which would be amazing. The supplier base is going to be tricky to work with because you're not going to be able to dual source. You're not going to get particularly like great prices. Don't forget, all of the Bentleys, all of the Porsche, like the Taycan, the Bentley, the Audi, it's all the same stuff, or a lot of the same stuff underneath.
Yep.
The Rolls Royce, it's got loads of, the Spectre is a lot of 7 Series or i7 under it.
Yeah.
So you're doing it on
economies of scale.
You're doing it on a bespoke platform. It doesn't share with the upcoming electric Range Rover, apparently. And I'm like, well, that's a worry, because then I'm sure there's profit in it, but how much money are you going to make? And then in markets where you're going to really struggle to sell. And then we haven't got to the elephant in the room, which is to really, I think, fly as a luxury brand these days. The thing they have to do is make an impeccable customer service experience sort of ecosystem around it. And I'm really sorry, but I'm watching firsthand as I see brand after brand struggle to do that, or the billions it takes to do it and do it well. Think of what Rivian promised and then have just been unable to deliver. And every brand going with like these, oh no, we're going to do direct to consumer sales, and then the dealers, particularly in the US, go, all right, well done, try. Yeah. Already seeing this with Scout, and I'm just a bit.
Jerry
like,
will be having that conversation with the dealers again.
I still will. I'm like, okay, great. I'm not trying to knock it down. I'm not trying to knock it. I'm just saying that I'm in the industry. I know where things are at. I'm looking at the same sort of data, and some of it I can totally see what they're trying to do, and I can see what they see, and I'm probably, I think, a bit more like, I think it could make sense than you are. But this whole thing of rebuilding the brand and the sort of the stores and the customer service network, and then the sales and the unit economics and the suppliers, that whole sort of picture when you stack it up, I'm like, oh fuck.
And
good luck. I
you're-
really hope they will pull it off, but it's going to be hard.
You're doing it with an organization that is old, that
And-
has profoundly entrenched ways of thinking and behaving, because that's the way we've always done it round here. And I know this from first-hand experience. Like
And on top of that, sorry,
Yeah.
one of the reasons that JLR has stuttered before the others in China is because the reputation for quality and reliability was trash.
Yeah.
And its reputation in the US is associated with unreliability. Now, somehow, Range Rover, it's such a amazing product. It gets away with it. People put up with it.
And
Jaguar is kind of, I mean, when we talk about what they didn't carry from the history, the unfortunate elephant in the room, and I'm not trying to put the boot in here, is that I think that, particularly for like a North American customer, they'll be like, okay, have they sorted out the reliability issues?
Right. The Range Rover to me is a really fascinating counterfactual to this whole almost like throw the baby out with the bathwater. And maybe it's simply because Jaguar was left in the weeds for too long. Maybe it's because Jaguar tried to do a Volvo Naughty but did like a German Sirius for too long, right? And suffered from poor reliability, and suffered from terrible after sales, and suffered from indifferent sales, right? But it is fascinating to watch how the Range Rover brand has gone from strength to strength with gentle evolution. And it now appeals to a wildly different customer base and the old customer base.
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of come along for the ride with Range Rover. And yeah, look, I mean, this is probably what the determination was. Jaguar was just too far gone to be able to do that, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing.
I think there's another thing here about how the world has obviously moved towards cars or SUVs. Range Rover was in the right place and developed in the right way. No small thanks to first BMW, then Ford, then Tata, and credit to him what Jerry has managed to do. Jaguar, I think, got stuck in this space of being a brand that was fundamentally associated with sports cars when people didn't want sports cars. I mean, it's a sad thing for any enthusiast to sort of face up to, but even the sales, I mean, the best-selling coupe, Mustang, some of the Porsches, they're low tens of thousands of units. And if you think about it, all of the most of the coupes and cabriolets that we knew 20, 30 years ago, they've all gone away. The SUV is the modern sports car, particularly in a place like China and in parts of America. And I am curious as to how they do with this product typology that they're planning to bring, starting with this 4-door GT. Because if I'm going to be positive, we're probably at a point of peak SUV.
Sure.
And at some point, we've talked about this before, we have to go, or customers will go somewhere else. Everyone will have an SUV. They're not great for efficiency when you get to kind of electric vehicles. They're kind of big and bulky and don't drive that well once you get back into a lower car and remember. And maybe I kind of want to move on and be open-minded. And one of the things we know that people do when they move to an electric vehicle is they tend to look around, they consider other brands to kind of what they previously did. They may have been loyal to BMW. They'll kind of, start to consider things like Kias suddenly. And they can detach themselves from their sort of typological box of, I'm buying a X-sized SUV. It transfers into what are the benefits and what is the meaning of this vehicle? Can it still deliver the practicality or versatility I need? Yes, but it's lower down. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, can I get in and out of it? Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, I'm willing to consider it. So maybe there's something in that.
It's just occurring to me, it's not the first time that Jaguar's done this in recent history. I mean, it is the first time they've done it with a brand. The last XJ, that was kind of a two-fingered salute. Fastback, interesting pillar construction.
It broke the convention of all the previous ones.
It did break the convention of all the previous ones, and nobody bought them.
It's actually quite a nice thing. I drove one a few times.
Really? I've always wanted to have a go.
It's quite good.
I mean, because it did kind of capture the gin and jag thing that I find appealing, but in a very different way. Mate, I don't know. The thing that I'm kind of leaning into as I get older is that I'm just a bit of an old fucking hippie, and I think for a lot of people there is a tension, or there's a polarity that exists between what do we need to do to make an impact, to make money, and what do we need to do in order to be a force for good, however you choose to define that. And I'm thinking here perhaps in terms of what do you need to be a force for good culturally, because car brands and cars are deeply, deeply cultural artifacts, right? They say so much about who we are, where we're at, and the type of world that we live in.
Yeah.
And my sense is that there was room here for Jaguar to change itself, to change its place in the market, to change its customer base, and do so in a way that didn't kick a hornet's nest, in a way that has been extremely kind of loud and intense and violent in the short term, but also in a way that I fear set an unstable foundation for the brand moving forward.
Yeah. I think they maybe had to shake the tree. Mm-hmm. I might not love everything about it, but I think they had to do what they at least briefed themselves to do. I think my sort of closing thought on it is that leading brands, I think, are part of culture, and part of that is to do with setting and leading culture and gently helping to, if you like, lead the conversation and the direction things are going. I think that what some of this says to me is that Jaguar is trying to meet the culture that we're in head on and embrace it rather than lead it. So the culture of the loudest, most extreme statement, voice, image gets the eyeballs. The culture of celebrity, the culture of influencer, rather than the culture of quiet wealth. And I think that will jar with a lot of people. And I think maybe for people like us who are maybe overthinkers and deep thinkers on this stuff, that's a bit, it's a bit sad. And it feels like as I said, as you said, it doesn't feel like a necessarily kind of happy and massively positivistic statement when you kind of decode the design and a lot of the meaning. But it does play with tensions. It does play with our culture right now of like polarity and black and white and ones and zeros. And I think if I were to finish on a positive note, that I wish them very well, because I think they maybe land in a space which is a little bit unique. It's not for me.
Oh,
and
don't say that.
But it's not because it's because if I decode the design, I'm still there's many unanswered questions about like why does it need to be still so. It feels somehow so brutal to the point of clumsiness, and why does the execution come off as slightly rushed, like when they've had so long? But maybe that's a deliberate ploy to sort of enrage and then soften us up to a production car which is actually better resolved. Let's take, for instance, the wheels are just too big. The wheels actually upset the proportion. That it proves out to me that you can have, the car designer thing of massive bonnet, amazing proportions, and huge wheels. Well, you can have a bit too much of that. Because it upsets the thing. But
it looks naive as a consequence, right? It looks naive as a consequence.
But maybe it works for what they want to do, and maybe it speaks to some of the people and puts them in a little bit of a kind of a unique space. And I think if that keeps Jaguar alive, that's very interesting.
I think
I'd rather have them here than not.
For me, to view the world as black and white, to view the world as a set of polarities, and to play into the idea of life being about polarities, I think is to fight against the fundamental nature of how life works, how the universe works. And they've done a fantastic job of making a big bang. I'm not sure they've done a fantastic job of setting themselves up to acknowledge the nature of how the world is in the long arc of history. And, there's dignity in death, actually. There is dignity in knowing when to bow out.
I think this leads us on to another topic about how many car brands does the world need.
Well, that can be a topic for the next show, Joe.
Next show. I mean, but in the previous show, we did ask people to have opinions, and I feel it's got opinions. It's just maybe not opinions that we like or you like. No, I hope listeners have enjoyed this conversation, and then it's maybe added something to other stuff you've read, because there is obviously a tremendous amount of noise out there. And just to reference and highlight, I mean, not everyone watches this on YouTube and stuff. We'll put some stuff in the show notes, but I think things we've both kicked around and references, there's a lot of research gone into this show despite the rambling nature of the conversation. Rory Sutherland's video on as a response to the brand, the two pieces I mentioned before by Adrian Clark that are on the Autopian, Jonathan Bell in Wallpaper today has quite a smart and informed piece. And Christopher Butt, Autodidact. If you go on Autodidact, he has a sort of a fairly short but a quite erudite piece, I think, about sort of where he's coming from on Jaguar as a brand and what the concept manages to do.
I think
others.
There was also the Chris Harrison Friends podcast, which is not something that I would normally listen to, but it was recommended to me by Aiden, one of our listeners, and it was interesting hearing from a group of later middle-aged men.
Some of whom own several Jaguars. But also some of whom are kind of deeply sort of aware of brand and product and how stuff kind of manifests in the market, sort of discuss this topic. I thought that was
kind of super interesting as
Yeah, and related to that,
well.
Harry's garage video was
Yeah.
was good as well. And he used to work at Jaguar.
So yeah, thanks everyone. We clearly love this stuff, right? And for the folk who are working at Jaguar and have been involved in this, like, props to you, absolutely,
Yeah.
for bringing this into the world. If the intent was to generate conversation, I think you've done an incredible job.
Right.
And I think what Joe and I are trying to do here is to just try and understand what it all means, because that's the gap that has been left unfilled so far. This has been Looking Out the Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked the show, might be a big ask. If you liked the show, please go ahead and share it with some friends. Introduce them to a couple of different points of view. Go ahead and give it a review. Leave us a comment on YouTube. Give us a 5-star if you like on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We'll be back in a couple of weeks probably with another conversation. Scintillating it will be, I'm sure. This is Drew Smith.
And Joe Simpson.
This has been Looking Out the Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You asked
I
for
can't
it.
let you hit record yet. Oh,
Yeah.
fuck, you're recording.
Yeah,
Fucker.
yeah, Joe. Face full of mince pie, huh? Getting in the festive spirit?
I mean, it's December now. I'm not in the UK, but I found mince pies.